Good morning and welcome to today's 20-minute update, BCF's monthly series of interactive calls and Facebook live streams to give you an inside look at BCF, our initiatives, and the work we do in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and the entire region. Thank you for joining us. I'm Keisha Leverette with BCF, and joining me today is Kevin Griffin Moreno. Kevin is BCF's Interim Director of Community Investment. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Keisha.
Before we get started, I want to thank our Civic Leadership Fund donors for their support. It's because of you that BCF can provide resources like the 20-minute update. Today, we're going to provide our viewers and our callers with an update on BCF's advocacy work. If you're joining us through the video live stream on Facebook, please share it using the hashtag 20-minute update. So Kevin, BCF's advocacy work, tell me about it. Tell me why BCF does it.
Sure. Well, good morning, everyone. Put simply, advocacy multiplies the value of our grants and programs. Um, the work of any nonprofit exists within a public policy context, whether you're looking at education policy, human services policy, funding for the arts. And as foundations make grants to support the work that these nonprofits do, it it really becomes in everyone's best interest for philanthropy, community foundations in particular, to be mindful of the policy environment these grants are being made in, and to be prepared to take action as appropriate. So, as since BCF's priority areas are neighborhoods and education, we try to pay close attention to what's going on at the state and local and even the federal levels within those subject areas so that we can weigh in as appropriate.
Good. So you mentioned education as one of BCF's priority areas. Can you talk to me about what we're doing in advocacy as it relates to education?
Sure. BCF has been vocal, particularly at the state policymaking level, on public education for going on 10 years now. In addition to speaking out directly to lawmakers and mobilizing our networks around topics like funding for public schools, school construction dollars, expanding pre-kindergarten services, we also have a history of providing grant funding to nonprofit organizations that themselves engage directly in advocacy on education. And we've also worked with Baltimore City schools over the years to strengthen school effectiveness, build principal leadership pipelines, and so forth. So right now, the most significant policy development facing public education in Maryland is the work of the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, otherwise known as the Kirwan Commission. So this is the body that has been charged by the legislature with recommending reforms to the state's current education funding formula, as well as issues like school district performance and accountability. And last year, as we started taking a look at the rationale for the commission's work and started seeing some of their preliminary recommendations, we at BCF were concerned that there seemed to be an absence of any sort of consideration of race and racial inequities and structural racism in the work that they were doing. And so, given the changing demographics of Maryland, given the history of structural racism and its impacts, given these profound inequities that we see at the school level, we felt that it was important to call attention to that issue. So that's why starting last November, we published an op-ed highlighting the subject. We've been talking to partners at the grassroots level, the traditional advocacy organization partners, talking about ways that we can work together to make sure that racial equity factors are taken into consideration both by the commission and by the lawmakers who are going to be acting on the commission's recommendations this year and in the years to come.
Okay. So you mentioned work with grassroots partners. How are we doing that work?
Last fall, we hired an advocate, Asia Carey, who has been attending and convening meetings of Black-led education advocacy organizations so that BCF can learn about their priorities and to figure out ways to support them in their work.
Okay. Now, is there a specific need or any specific comments that Asia is hearing from the community about education? Are there any sort of emerging themes?
Yeah, as we take a look at sort of what the commission and the current legislative proposals are focusing on, um, we notice that there's not a lot of attention being paid, for instance, to the disparate racial impact of zero tolerance disciplinary policies on students. The issue of ensuring culturally relevant instruction in the classroom, the issues of teacher training and certification and retention, who is encouraged to become a teacher, who is incentivized to remain a teacher. So there's a whole host of issues in which race plays a very critical role that we feel that the commission should be looking at.
Okay, excellent. Let's pause here and see if anyone on the line has a question. Please dial *6 to unmute your line, or if you're following us on the live stream on Facebook, type your question in the comments section.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have been working with different communities of Baltimore City, and I've done a lot of working with diverse populations. And my concern is this: with the children of Baltimore City in numerous schools, whether it's public or the private schools, there seems to be a lack of support for trauma. And I've worked with adults that have mental issues and are homeless and addicted, and it all stems from childhood trauma. And what can be done to nip this in the bud or focus on the issues of children before they get to the stage where they're out of control and the city is out of control and it's not being addressed as it should, I think.
Thank you so much for your question. You raised such an important point. In terms of what's being done at the school district level or in the classrooms, I can't really speak to the sort of in-school programming that's happening. I know, as you probably do, working in this area, that there is an increasing, perhaps belated, but increasing focus on the impacts of trauma on both childhood development and adult success in the long term. There was a network, and I believe it's still going on. I may not. I may need to update my information on this, but there was a network that was being convened by the Krieger Fund, the Fund for Change, and other public and private partners who were focused on trauma, and they were really looking at solutions to childhood trauma from a very multidisciplinary approach. There's organizations like Holistic Life Foundation, which they started off doing mindfulness and yoga, but really came to see the value of providing those of those services to young people in school from a trauma-informed, evidence-based approach. So I know that there's a lot going on, but that's not to say that the issue that you raise and the need for addressing the impact of trauma on kids isn't a critical one. And I thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you.
I've gone to the Board of Education and participated in many forums, and they were talking about the schools, which is it's really a big issue as far as the plumbing and the heating, and the teachers having a lack of training. what happens to the children and the process of these things that are crumbling around them when we can't even, as grandparents and parents, act as we're doing our daily chores, is going to work or whatever else, our children are not safe. I have been a part of a few instances in Baltimore City where the children are going from school to school, fighting. There are bullying instances in Baltimore City schools. There are sexual acts being performed in Baltimore City schools. And what can we do to address those? Every issue that you're discussing is important, but there is a lack of communication between the community and corporate. I know that all your issues and all your responses of what you're talking about is important today, but there are some down home community-based issues that need to be addressed as an emergency. So how do people like me that communicate, and I'm there in the community as a community advocate, what can we do? There are so many of us, but we're not connected. As you said, there are different organizations, but why don't we know about them? What can we do to get the information out with those that are willing to volunteer to make Baltimore City schools and our youth better and stronger holistically?
Sure. I will say two things. One is, well, three things. One is that what you bring up again, just like when you mention trauma, is so important, and it's huge. That's the first point. The second is that it's really beyond the scope of what we can do in a 10-20 minute conversation over the phone to start addressing those issues. But the third thing is that it sounds like we could really benefit from hearing your perspective and exchanging ideas. So I would encourage you. So,
not to cut you off, but I'm willing to come in and sit down and talk. And I have also gone to commissioners meetings and all kinds of delegates and all of that good stuff.
Fantastic.
So I'm willing.
That's excellent, and we definitely want to hear from you. I'm going to go ahead and give you our email address. If you email your contact information and reference this call to bcf@bcf.org,
Yeah.
we will definitely get back in touch with you, and look forward to a fuller conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Sure.
you for that question, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kevin, can you talk to us about what other issues BCF is advocating for?
Sure. One of our long-standing priorities within our neighborhoods focus is environmental sustainability, specifically how neighborhoods can become cleaner and greener. And one of our staff members, Andrea Calderon, has done an exceptional job in helping to organize young people, youth interns, with the city sustainability initiatives and a coalition called Baltimore Beyond Plastic, in calling for both bans at both the state and local level on disposable styrofoam containers. And I was delighted to see earlier this week that the Baltimore City Council had approved the ban at the city level. It's gone to the mayor for her signature, and that the ban effort at the state level is moving its way through the General Assembly. And I think the point there, sort of related to the last caller's commenter's point, is how important the voices of young people are. Anybody who's really directly affected by these issues, their voices are critical in bringing about positive change.
That's very true, Kevin. If you'd like to see footage from the youth rally, please go to BCF's newsroom page on our website. So Kevin, the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance is an initiative of BCF, and they also do some advocacy lobbying work. Can you talk to me about some of the things they're working on?
Well, sure. So CMTA has been featured on this 20-minute update series before, so I encourage folks to look at the archive and check out that conversation. But in brief, they advocate in a whole range of ways for transit planning in the Baltimore region, for responsible transportation planning in general throughout the state. And one of the most significant issues that they're working on right now is a bill within the General Assembly that would do a couple of things. It would increase funding for the Maryland Transit Administration so that MTA could do what it needs to do to make improvements to transportation services in the Baltimore region. It would also provide funding for repairs for Washington, D.C.'s ailing metro system. And in addition to just being a good bill, good policy, it really shows how advocates from the DC region and from the Baltimore region can work together on collective solutions.
So BCF is also advocating for charitable giving. We have many donors and families and individuals who come to BCF to kind of help out with their philanthropy. Can you talk to me about Endow Maryland and what's that doing?
Sure. In 2014, BCF, as well as other community foundations across the state, joined together to create the Endow Maryland tax credit. So this is a 25% tax credit on state tax credit on donations to qualifying permanent endowment funds at community foundations in Maryland to support work that is taking place in Maryland. It's been a real hit. We've had a lot of positive attention around this, and now we are joining again with our fellow community foundations, as well as Association of Baltimore Grantmakers and a few legislators in the General Assembly, to expand the state allocation of the Endow Maryland tax credit from $250,000 a year to $1 million a year.
So in addition to our youth sustainability interns working at the local level on lobbying, is there any other advocacy that BCF is doing on the local level, like with the Baltimore City Council?
Come on, sure. I'm a business call. Come on.
And I'm going to ask you to hit *6 to mute your line on the phone there. We have a little feedback.
I'm sorry.
So last year, BCF held a breakfast for city council members and followed it up with one-on-one meetings with many of them, just to get their sense of what's going on in their neighborhoods. What are the most pressing concerns that they see going on in the communities that they represent? As you mentioned, the polystyrene ban has been moving through City Council, and there's been a lot of energy there. And we've just generally noticed a lot of energy and leadership coming from City Council, not just from newer members, but from longtime council members. And we just want to make sure that we stay engaged with them.
Okay, great. So we covered the state and the local level. Is there anything we're doing on the federal level?
A little bit. Over the years, we've paid periodic visits to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and one of the resounding themes has been how little information congressional lawmakers have about the philanthropic sector in general, but specifically about community foundations, since we tend to be somewhat distinct within that field. So BCF has joined with community foundations across the country to retain a firm whose job it is to walk the halls of Congress and to provide information to lawmakers about the good work that community foundations do throughout America, but also to really analyze federal tax reform proposals, which are gaining increasing traction and volume in recent weeks, to analyze tax reform policy and proposals and to see what the implications are for community foundations and their work.
Okay. So what would you say to someone who thinks that a community foundation shouldn't be doing advocacy work?
Now, I would say, again, going back to the point that advocacy is just another tool in the kit, and that if we are to have an impact, particularly when we're looking at limited grant funds to commit in any given year, engaging in public policy advocacy is a way of extending the reach of those grants and really supporting our grantees and other partners in their efforts to call for lasting change.
So I think we have time for one more question. If you're on the phone, please hit *6 to unmute your line and ask the question. If you're following us on the Facebook live stream, please type your question into the comment box. Okay, since there are no other questions, we're right here at 9:20, which means this 20-minute update has come to an end. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thank you again to our civic leadership donors for making all of this possible. And we'd like to thank all of you who joined us on the line and on the Facebook live stream today, and for taking the time to learn about BCF's advocacy work. We'll be back here again next month at 9 a.m. You can also visit bcf.org to sign up for BCF e-news. And again, thank you all and have a great day.